Hey guys, MiniWarGamer Mike here from MiniWarGaming.com, and today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to convert a Tau Fire Warrior and a Tau xv15 stealth suit into a Tau xv15 stealth suit. Now if you don't know what I'm talking about, this is the normal Tau stealth suit you can get off the shelf at most Games Workshop and off the store from MiniWarGaming.com. It's known as the xv15 stealth suit, and it's kind of like the heavy armor version of a stealth suit. In the Tau Codex, and available from direct sources, you can get an xv15 stealth suit. It looks a lot cooler. It's a little more mobile. It's a thinner type of armor, and it just looks like it'd be more agile. But it's only available as a metal model, and only available from direct services from Games Workshop. So it's a little bit harder to get, and of course being metal, a lot of people are kind of turned off by that. So I'm going to show you how to make one out of plastic using a stealth suit sprue and a Fire Warrior sprue. So we're going to take a little bit of one of these and a little bit of one of these and basically build this guy. You can see it still looks like a stealth suit, but he's a little more agile, a little more thin, and just kind of a cool different model. So I'm going to start with this. So of course you need to have a stealth suit box, because we're going to use a bunch of parts out of this. You also need a Fire Warrior box, because we're going to use some parts out of this. You're also going to want to have your hobby clippers handy, your hobby knife, plastic glue, and a file's a really good idea just for helping with the mold lines. And don't forget to just have some paper towel nearby. The plastic glue, especially if you're using this type, likes to kind of leak out of the container. So you don't want to get that all over your table, all over your models. You want to, basically when you open this up, you're going to want to let it have somewhere to leak. So we're going to just put it on the paper towel. Okay, so we're going to start with opening the stealth suit box, because we need a couple pieces out of here. Definitely need a base. We got to stick it on something. And we're going to need a set of legs. And this one's got this extra little bit of sprue here. We're just going to take that off. Okay, so we've got our legs ready. Obviously we need to sort of clean those up a little bit, but they're good to go now. We're going to take the arms from the stealth suit. So one left arm and one right arm. And again, we'll have to clean those up. And last thing we need is a weapon. Actually, sorry, that's not the last thing. Also need one left shoulder pad and one right shoulder pad. The two shoulder pads are a little bit different on the stealth suit. One has the Tau symbol on it, and the other one's just really plain. So we want one of each just for variety. And last, we just need one of these little antennas. So that's all we need from the stealth suit. So now we're going to open the Fire Warrior box. And we don't need much out of here. So you can ignore the drones. We don't need anything from them. You can build them later, but we don't need them for this. So what we're going to take here is one of the shoulder pads for the Fire Warrior. Now we've already got two shoulder pads here. We're actually going to use this for something different. I'll show you in a minute. We're also going to take a Fire Warrior torso, a Fire Warrior backpack, and last we need a Fire Warrior head. Take one of the ones in armor. Don't bother with the ones that are bareheaded, unless you really want to. And with the head comes the little tiny antenna. So we'll clip that off too. Okay, and that's all we need there. So we've got our body, our legs, we have our torso, we have our big shoulder pad, we have our two regular shoulder pads for the stealth suit, we have our antenna, we have a different antenna, we have a backpack, we have the three pieces of our weapon, and we have the arms and the head. So first thing we're going to want to do is just clean up any mold lines. To do that, you just take your hobby knife. So you can see there's like a line right here along the model. You just want to take your blade and drag it backwards towards yourself. I know you normally don't cut towards yourself, but since the blade's on the opposite side, we're probably okay. And if you just keep scraping like this, you'll find that the mold line is gone pretty quickly. You just want to repeat that for anywhere you can see a mold line really visibly, because nobody likes mold lines. And when you're working in tight spaces like this, just be extra careful. And then just continue cleaning mold lines on all the different pieces here. Doesn't take a lot of pressure to get rid of a mold line. You just need to be, very light scrapes. If you have to cut one off, be very, very careful. You don't want to cut into the model. You're just trying to get rid of a little bit of excess plastic. Just use nice light movements to just drag the blade and take off that extra material that's on the edges. It takes a little bit of work, but your models will look a lot better for it. Now sometimes you get these little sort of notches that are left when you cut a model or cut a piece off of a sprue. Those you normally have to kind of shave off more than the way you just remove mold lines. You don't have to actually kind of cut that little piece off. Just be careful that you don't cut yourself at all, and don't use too much pressure. You don't want to cut into the model. You just want to kind of take that little notch off. Got one here as well. Now the Fire Warrior torsos are notorious for their mold flash. You can actually see there's like an extra little piece just hanging off here. So we're going to just trim that off. And there's almost always a really big one running right along the side under the arm, so it might take a few scrapes to get that off. And also up near the shoulder, there's usually a pretty substantial chunk right there. And then as well, right along the top, along the back of where the neck would be, there's one continuous line. I've seen that on every Fire Warrior torso I've ever put together. I've never once seen a Fire Warrior without these mold lines, so be aware of them if you're building Tau. There's a lot of mold lines on your Fire Warriors. They're all easy to clean up though. There's nothing really difficult to reach. It's just a byproduct of the molding process. The shoulder pads normally aren't too bad. Sometimes you get that little nub where they join the sprue on the one side, but their mold lines almost always run directly along the edges of the pad and you don't really even see them. So at most you just kind of want to take your blade and just kind of round off the edge a little bit. You don't really need to do anything else with the pads though. The mold literally runs along the entire edge of the shoulder pad. Now this is the shoulder pad from the Fire Warrior sprue. Don't spend too much time cleaning this one up because we're actually going to cut it into pieces in a minute anyway. And you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, here's one of the shoulder pads for the stealth suit. I really can't even find any mold lines on this one. It's ready to go as it is. The Fire Warrior backpacks, kind of the same thing as the Fire Warrior torsos. They almost always have a mold line running all the way along them. Just takes a second to clean off, but it's there. And they also get the nub effect where they join their sprue. Fire Warrior heads. Mold line runs all the way around the middle of the head. It's a little bit tricky because it doesn't run in the same direction as the detail. So you've got to be really careful taking this one off, especially across the top of the head. You want to try and make it a nice and smooth surface, which sometimes you're actually better off getting your file out and grinding it that way, because then you're sort of rounding the rest of the head out with it instead of just taking the line off. You want to be careful though, because most of the Fire Warrior heads have this little line running down them, starts at the optic area and just runs all the way to the back of the head. You want to make sure you don't grind down so much that you lose that detail. Just be extra careful when you're taking that line off. If you have a hobby file with a rounded side, the round is really good for getting the under part of the head, because it actually pretty much matches the curve that the Fire Warrior head has to it. Now the other side, you want to be careful again, because there's the little notch that the antenna attaches to, and you don't want to file that off. Luckily, you're also going to be gluing something to it, so if you don't take the line off there, it really doesn't matter, because it's going to be covered up. The antennas, if they have a mold line at all, it runs around the outside, and just takes a second to clean off. Oddly enough, as much as they're a really tiny detail, I find that they're normally pretty good for mold lines when compared to the rest of the Tau pieces. Now it's funny, I don't actually collect a Tau army, at least not yet anyway, but they are one of my favorite armies to assemble and paint. They have a really sort of anime style to them, which, I don't know, I'm a fan. Not everyone is, but they're one of the more unique looking armies in 40k. And as far as the history goes, they're also one of the only armies in the 40k universe that actually still invents new technology. I mean, Terrans are pretty much afraid of the stuff. Eldar are too busy trying not to go extinct. Orcs don't really care. Tyranid are too busy eating things. They don't really have technology to speak of. And the Necrons have been around for 60 million years, so they're probably done inventing for a while. So if you're into technology at all, really Tau kind of probably speak to that, because they're the only army that's out there actually making anything. Okay, so there's all of our pieces now with the majority of the mold lines cleaned up. Might still be one or two in there. So first thing we're going to do is just open up our plastic glue. And I'm going to do this over the paper towel, just to kind of illustrate. See, when you open up especially these squeeze tube type ones, when you open them up, you almost always get this just gushing of glue out. And that's useless. You can't use that much glue on anything. There's enough glue there already to assemble a tank. Just keep going until it runs out of glue, until it stops gushing like that. It only takes a couple seconds usually. You can see now it's already really slowed down. I like to take a hobby knife and just sort of clean up this dried, crusty bit. It just makes the cap go back on better later. It's not necessary, but I find it makes the glue easier to use next time. It's done gushing now, so I'm going to put this aside. First thing we're going to do is just glue our feet onto the base. Nothing really too exciting here. Now this model tends to lean forward a fair bit, so if you can get the feet towards the back of the base, it'll look a little more centered over it instead of being really forward heavy. So that we can just put aside to dry now. Next thing I'm going to do is just assemble the weapon. I'm just going to run a really fine bead of glue along here. You can see I'm getting a bubble here. I'm going to wipe that off. We don't want that much glue, ever. You just want a really fine bead. So if you end up with a lot of glue, just wipe it off and then do your assembly. You don't want big globs of glue sticking out anywhere. Because it's a plastic cement, what it does is actually melts the plastic. So when you have too much glue, you melt the extra plastic. And that just doesn't look good. Okay, so that's basically in place now. You can see when we put these two pieces together, they don't quite line up perfectly. So You can kind of just scrape that down afterwards with a hobby knife, just to give it a cleaner appearance, or go at it with a file for a little bit. Just brings the curves together, makes it look more like a solid piece. And the last piece of the weapon is this sort of little round barrel that just glues in the end. It's got a little notch. It can only go in one position. It just goes in like that. It's keyed so it can't turn. So we just squirt a little glue in here. We can be kind of haphazard with this one. Just get a dab of glue in there. And then this goes in like so. Okay, so that's ready to put aside now. We can let that dry as well. Next thing we're going to do is start assembling the torso. We're going to use the Fire Warrior torso as is, and we're going to glue the backpack in place. Just use the regular Fire Warrior backpack at this point. Now the funny thing is, because the glue is a liquid and there's actually a peg and a hole type assembly there, if you put too much glue in, it actually makes it hard to put the backpack in because the glue forces it back out again. Kind of the opposite of what you'd expect glue to do. Okay, so we can put that aside for a moment. Next, we'll get the small antenna glued to the side of the head. And this one, you just need a really tiny dot of glue, like very, very minimal. That might be too much. And there's a small dot, like an empty dot on one side of the antenna, and that just goes onto the dot on the side of the head. It's really just to help it line up. It doesn't hold it in position by any means. And in fact, this might be the most annoying detail you'll ever glue on a plastic model. We're going to leave that alone for a while. We don't want it to fall off. It's stuck to my finger. Okay, so we have the Fire Warrior shoulder pad and the two regular Stealth Suit shoulder pads. We're going to use the Stealth Suit shoulder pads for shoulders. We can put them aside though. The Fire Warrior shoulder pad here is actually going to be used as part of our chest piece to make the chest a little more robust, because the Fire Warrior chest is just a little too small for a stealth suit. I'll show you how to cut that to size in a minute here. So now, next thing we have to do is, the stealth suits and the Fire Warriors go together a little bit differently. The stealth suit has this rounded bubble on it where the torso joins, so you can kind of angle it in different ways, whereas the Fire Warrior is flat on the bottom. It's just meant to glue flat on the legs. So you're going to basically cut this notch off. Now start with just your plastic clippers, and you just cut, make sure you get nice and straight, and basically just cut most of that off. Then take your hobby file and just grind it down. Make sure it's nice and smooth. So that's ready to attach the torso now. So we're just going to take a little glue, and we can now glue the torso in place. So far we've got that much going on. And you can see that torso, like I said, looks a little bit thin compared to the rest of the body. That's why we're going to bulk it out. And now the arms work very much the same way, where they have round joints for joining the body on the stealth suits, but the Fire Warrior has flat sides where the arms join. So what we have to do is kind of decide what position we want the arms to be in, and then cut that notch off accordingly so we get the flat part correct. So I'm going to start with the right arm. That's the weapon carrying arm, because it's a little less interesting. And we're going to kind of try and cut it at a little bit of an angle, so just about there. That's what you do is, once you've decided sort of the angle you're cutting, just take that notch off to flatten it out, and then just grind it down again. When you're grinding, make sure you're grinding flat. You don't want to accidentally round the surface out, like I just did. Do as I say, not as I do. Okay, so that arm's ready to go. Now this arm is the, doesn't really hold anything, so we can make it a little more dynamic. You don't want it like, you know, obscene or anything, but we can make it pointing upright or look like he's running. So I'm going to cut it off right about there. And that one looks pretty flat already, so I'm just going to touch it up with the file. Okay, so now we're ready to put the arms in place. And same thing with the other side. Now remember, this one's going to be holding a fairly large weapon, so you don't want to accidentally like point it downwards or anything. You want to make sure it's still going to be capable of holding that weapon. So now we've got both of our arms in place. Next we're going to put the head in there, and the regular Fire Warrior head on Fire Warrior torso at this point. So I just need a little dot of glue on one side or the other, and just stick the head in place. There's nothing more to it than that. Just make sure it's looking the way you want it to, as far as the direction he's facing and so on. Okay, so right now it just looks like we have a Fire Warrior with really beefy legs. Nothing wrong with that. So last few things here. The stealth suit shoulder pads are going to go on just like you were building a regular stealth suit. They have this little octagon shaped notch, and that lines right up with the body, or rather with the arm. Okay, now I got a little dab of dry glue in there. We don't want that. It's not really dry either, it's sticky. Clean that out. Now we're ready to glue this in place. If you just wiggle it around, it'll line up itself, because it really only has one way it can go. So you can see the little six-sided shoulder pad on the arm itself, and that's where that little crater dent sort of lines up with. So this time I'm going to put the glue directly on the shoulder, Oh, now this one, we've actually got our head in the way. So I'm gonna be bad. I'm gonna rip the head off for a minute. We'll put it back in afterwards. Okay, so just got a few details left to go here. Want to make that chest a little more important. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the shoulder pad as a chest plate. It's kind of big right now though. So I'm going to trim it down at the top. So there's the regular Fire Warrior shoulder pad. And you can see there's a sort of a little detail carved in right here. We're going to use that line. This is at the top of the shoulder pad. And we're going to just cut the whole thing off right along that line. Just like that. And the bottom, it's a little bit longer than we need. So I'm going to trim it about halfway down that bottom detail and just pop through it. So now you can see I've got something a little bit smaller at this point now. And we're just going to take the hobby file and clean that edge up where we've cut. Doesn't take much to file down plastic. Don't put too much pressure. You just want to slide the file back and forth. Okay, and then what we need to do is take the round side of the file and just file down the inside of this a little bit to make room for the chest. Okay, so now we have that little piece ready to go. And we're going to just glue that right over the chest here. So I'm just going to squirt a little glue on the inside, more towards the sides where it can make the most contact, and just center that on the chest. Press it in a little bit. Depending on the position of your arms, it might stick out just a touch. You might need to file down a side a bit, but that's pretty decent there. Actually, I'm not really happy with that, because if you look at the top, we have a really wide gap here. I'm not really thrilled with that. So I'm going to pull this back off. I'm going to file down the inside, specifically towards the edges. When you're doing conversions like this, a lot of the process is just trial and error, fitting things, cutting them a little bit to make them fit better. Worst case scenario, we can always fill that gap with green stuff, but I'm trying to avoid doing that today. Oh, now my bottom just got a little bit too ground down, so let's clean that up just a touch. Okay, now you see the filing's kind of gotten a little offline here. It's it's a straight line, but it's not horizontal anymore. So I'm just going to grind down the other side to make it match. Okay, so we're going to try and glue that in place again now. Alright, there we go. Still got a fair bit of a gap up top, but I'm going to leave that alone. Okay, so last couple of pieces here. We're going to glue the head back in place now. Hopefully we don't have to reposition that arm to make room for it. And it looks like we might. That shoulder pad's really running into the head now. Okay, so the head's not going to go on yet. This shoulder pad is giving us a little bit of a problem. So we can either try and reposition the arm. If that arm were just angled down a little bit, it wouldn't be in the way so much. So we're going to take the arm right off. This is what I mean by the trial and error process when you're doing conversions. Sometimes things just don't fit together the way you plan them to. So I'm just going to shave this down a little bit with the clippers. Try and get a better angle on it. Add a little glue back onto there. Then we'll just attach the shoulder pad, or rather attach the arm to the shoulder again. You can already tell that shoulder pad's not going to be in our way anymore. So we're just going to let this sit for a minute. We want that arm to really be solid before we start working on the rest. So the gun's ready, and we just have to put the head in place basically now. Third attempt to put the head on. Okay, head's now in place, so we can now kind of position it accordingly where we want it to be looking. So the last two details are the weapon and this little antenna. So we're going to attach this antenna to the backpack just for an extra little bit of detail. Now it's going to sit flush up against this piece. So to do that, we're going to have to cut this little knob off. Just cut it off with your clippers and file it down a little bit. Wipe off any dust from filing. I'm actually going to apply the glue to the antenna on the two sides where it's going to make contact with the backpack. That's too much glue, so we'll just wipe some off on the paper towel. And then we can slide that in there. And it just adds a little more dimension to the model. So the last thing to do is to attach the weapon. And all it's going to do is, now we've got another problem. The weapon's not going to sit flush on the arm anymore. So we're going to take the arm back off again. I hate doing it. We're going to attach the weapon first. You see, when you're converting, it's really okay to make mistakes as long as you can cover them up and go back. We haven't lost any pieces. We haven't ruined anything. Okay, weapon's on the arm. I should have done that in the first place. Now I just need to glue this in place and actually have it stay there. And we've cut the arm down a little bit, so this might actually be tricky now. So what I'm going to do here, just to make things a bit easier, the sprues have these little round pieces on. It's part of the molding process. Also makes great filler. I'm going to cut that off. Now it's definitely the wrong shape at the moment, because when you use the clippers like that, it just kind of comes to a crown. So we're going to cut that flat. We just kind of want this to be an extension for our arm. Sprue is a great thing to keep around when you're doing conversions. You can use it to fill gaps. If you're trying to bulk something out, you can always use a little piece of sprue just to sort of fill in the blanks or to build supports for parts of your model. You see, this is going to probably really bulk out our arm too much, so I'm going to file it down a bit more. Filing something this tiny can be really tricky. Okay, Hopefully that's tiny enough now. So first we're going to glue that onto the torso. There, let that sit. Then the arm will join onto that. Actually, that's going to look, it's a little bit too thick still. So hopefully I can do this without disrupting the gluing too much. Okay, so now we've got our little joining piece of sprue glued in place. Now we can glue the arm or the shoulder straight to that. And there we are. We have an Tau xv15 stealth suit in plastic, made from an xv15 stealth suit and a Fire Warrior.